This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, so people are joining, so we'll kick off, Lucy, and I'll do the introduction, certify. So yeah, just coming. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to the ICG's Digital Academy training series. And thank you very much for joining us this morning, members of the ICG. And I can see that people are coming in as I'm speaking, so that's great. I'm Jane Oakley, the member of the ICG committee responsible for running our training programme. And just to let you know, we are recording this session so that it will be available to watch again, and also for people who can't attend today. Okay, Lucy, next one. Lucy?
Sorry.
Okay.
You might want to carry on.
Okay, so we're in the absence of our next slide. Our training session today is entitled Writing for Impact, and we're very pleased to welcome Judith Staig of Content Right, who in the next hour is going to take us through a mini masterclass that's designed to help us write better. So she's going to help us to get over the block, to get started and to write more confidently, speedily, and importantly, impactfully, which is the purpose of the session. And that might be for research reports, opinion pieces, or on social media, including our LinkedIn and ICG profiles, which from personal experience, I know presents a particular writing block. Judith has been a researcher for more than 25 years. She specialises in B2B and tech, and has worked both client side and agency side. In 2013, her love of writing, creative communications, and storytelling in research led her to found Content Right, which is a consultancy providing writing and editing, content planning, training, and research services to the market research sector. She also runs a local freelancers business support group and serves as part of the marketing team of the AMSR. And Judith is also a fellow ICG member, so she understands our needs very well. Judith is going to present to us, and in the interest, as we've only got an hour, we're going to ask you to post any questions as we go through on the chat function, which we'll monitor, and then there will be an opportunity to follow these up and ask your own questions live on mic and camera at the end of the session. But if you could mute yourselves whilst Judith is actually presenting, that would be technically really, really helpful. Thank you. Now, our session today, we're really grateful to Ivy Exec for sponsoring this webinar. And Ivy Exec is a global network of more than 2.4 million C-suite executives, key opinion leaders, policy influencers, and other high-ranking level decision makers. And these experts possess great decision-making authority, industry influence, and specialised expertise that is of tremendous value to research and consulting firms looking to conduct qual and quantitative studies across the world. With member representation across 191 nations, IB experts come from a variety of different industries, ranging from commercial corporations to government agencies and non-profit organisations. So thank you very much to IB Exec. And now, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to our trainer speaker expert today, Judith, who will take us through the art of writing better. Thank you, Judith.
Thank you. Just share my screen. Right. Can everyone see that? Do I need to do something to make it big? Jane?
It's fine for me, Judith. I think people can probably make it bigger on their own screens if they want to.
Okay, all right, that's good. I'll get going then. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming along this morning. We're going to talk about writing for impact. normally I would deliver this sort of in a room, and we do it as a masterclass, and you'd have time to sort of go through exercises and work on some writing. Obviously, we have a very short time this morning, so hopefully I'm going to give you something that you can take away and apply to your writing in your own time, because we all have to write stuff. I was a researcher, as Jane said, for a long time, and now I write for researchers. There tends to be two sorts of writing that I do. There's either writing where you've got a lot of content already, so writing a research report where you've got lots of findings and data, etc., and you have to kind of organise them and think about how to make a report out of them. Or there's writing, which is the sort that tends to scare people most, which is when you really have a blank page in front of you and you're having to fill that blank page with things that are coming out of your head. And that can be really, really challenging. So that sort of writing, I mean, things like writing a blog or writing an opinion piece or some thought leadership, or even things like writing your ICG profile or your LinkedIn profile. And when I first sort of suggested that I might do this course, everyone said, oh yes, could we please do about writing your ICG profile, because that's really, really awful. So I'm going to focus on that sort of writing where you've got a blank page and you have to think of things to fill it. But a lot of the stuff that I'm going to tell you anyway, and a lot of the sort of tips and practical stuff will apply to any sort of writing that you have to do for work, and possibly for creative writing as well, if you do such a sort of thing. So, okay, what we're going to go through. We are going to look at what the 3 steps are to writing success, 3 simple things that if you do them, you will be a better writer. We're going to then take a step back and think, well, what actually is that? What is good writing? And have a think about what that means. Then I'm going to share with you my foolproof framework for how to write an article when you've got that blank page in front of you. And it really is foolproof. It works for me, therefore it should work for everybody. And I'm going to give you some top tips at the end, and just sort of some final words to be going on with. Okay, so we will work through that. So 3 steps to writing success. There are 3 things I would contend that if you do them, you will be a better writer. Now, normally I would be in a room with people and I would get them to put their hand up and shout things out, and that's not going to work so well today. So just have a think. And people tend to say things like, oh, accuracy and clarity and brevity and all of those things are absolutely, definitely really important things and really good for good writing. They're not quite what I'm thinking about, so I'm just gonna show you what they are. The 3 things that I contend, if you do these 3 things regularly, you will absolutely become a better writer. So the 3 things are read, write, and edit. And I'm not sure if there are any surprises there. Sometimes there are surprises. I don't know. And I'm going to, I've kind of structured the session we're going to do today around those 3 sections, really. So we're going to look at reading to help us understand what good writing is. We're going to then think about the process of writing. And then we're going to talk a bit more about the editing process at the end. Okay. And my point really on the slide is that like anything, it's just practice. But these are the things specifically that you have to practice. You have to read stuff to know good writing. You have to spend time writing, because you will hone your skills. And then the really crucial bit actually is the editing. The writing itself, you can put anything on the page, but it's in the editing that it becomes good. Okay, so reading. As I said, I think that reading helps you identify good writing. And again, if we were sort of in a room together, this would be an opportunity to say to people, well, whose writing do you enjoy, and get some suggestions, get people to sort of shout out the sort of writing that they enjoy. They're typically some of the sort of, when I ask this question, people come up with business writers, people like, his name's completely gone out of my head. I'm just going to look at my bookshelf. So Seth Godin, people like that, people like the guy who wrote the Black Swan thing, all of those sorts of business writers tend to come out. Okay. Yeah, sorry, that's okay. Malcolm Gladwell, that's it. He always comes out as a sort of writer that people like. And then I sort of ask what people like about it, and people tend to say that they like these sorts of writers because they're very sort of story based. They're giving you business points of view, but they're not just factual. They're not just loads of sort of data. They make it personal. They make it anecdotal. They're engaging. They're sort of easy to read, and you're just sort of learning along the way. Okay, so what I would counsel you to do is to have a think about the sort of writing that you enjoy and the sort of things that you like to read, and sort of think about it critically. Okay, and think about, what actually is it about this writing that I like? Why did I bought myself 2 business books this week. I started reading that one. I couldn't bear it. I had to put it down. It was unreadable, even though I was really interested in the topic. Whereas this other one, I was just straight into it and I could not put it down. Have a think critically about it. What is it on the first page that drew you in? Why are you stuck? Why have you stuck with it? What's exciting to you about it? What makes it easy to read? How have they structured their sentences? Are they long? Are they short? What sort of language are they using? What sort of words are they using? Think about their tone of voice. Okay. One of the sorts of writers that, again, if we're talking about the sort of writing where you're starting with a blank page, one of the types of writers that I would encourage you to spend some time reading are the columnists. And the reason for that is that number one, these guys are writing stuff all the time. Okay, and I again, typically in the room, I would ask people to give suggestions, and people like Caitlin Moran come up a lot as a writer that people really like, and I'm going to take her as a great example because, number one, she writes every single week in the Sunday Times magazine. She writes a similar length piece every week, and so she has an awful lot of practice at doing it. So this is, one of my tenets. She's writing all the time. The other reason that the columnists are interesting, because if you start to look at what they're doing, they're pretty formulaic in the way they approach their writing. So if you look at Caitlin Moran, she did an article a little while ago in one of her columns where the column was ostensibly about women in the arts, which is obviously an interesting topic and something that she had something to say about. But she started off the piece by saying, I once met the actress Felicity Jones at a party, which is kind of nothing to do with women in the arts at all. And she goes on to say that her and Felicity Jones were bemoaning that you can't go out for a cigarette break anymore because no one smokes anymore. And like, why can't you actually just go out for a fart break instead and be really honest? Say, I have to fart. I'm going to go out of the room. Let's make that a thing. And that was absolutely nothing to do with it at all. So she had this sort of introduction that was really engaging, exciting and interesting. Like, why are you talking about Felicity Jones and farting? And then she then went on to sort of attach the main body of the article to it by saying, then I read a piece that Felicity Jones had talked about women in the arts. And I thought, oh, well, no wonder she's talking about that because I agreed with her about everything. This sort of formula of having something anecdotal at the beginning and then getting into the main piece and then sort of wrapping it up at the end is something that the columnists quite often do. And it's a really easy way. And when we come on to the framework that I'm going to talk to you about, it's a really easy way of getting over that blank page that you've got at the beginning. Okay, so the columnists are good people to have to read more and think about your writing and think about the sort of writing you want to do. And the other thing that you're doing when you're reading them is that I would suggest that you do is think about what is their tone of voice, who are they, what are they trying to convey, what's their sort of personal brand image, and what are they trying to achieve with their writing, what are they trying to tell you about themselves with the words that they use, the way that they structure their writing, the feelings that it engenders in you. Okay, so there we go. So having said that, what actually is good writing? And again, when you ask people this, they tend to say, oh yeah, you've got to get the grammar right, you've got to get all the spelling right. And I think often this is something that puts people off. They're quite nervous about it, and we all think back to our school days and those awful grammar lessons and all the rules, and we can't remember them, and we fear getting it wrong, and we fear that it's all going to be terrible. And I would say, yeah, you've got to get the grammar basically right and the spelling, but this isn't necessarily good writing. They're just sort of table stakes. You've got to have decent grammar and just get your spelling right. But that's not what makes good writing necessarily. And again, you know, the other thing that people, as I said, say, you know, quite a lot of the time, like clarity, it's got to be really clear to read. Yes, absolutely it has. It's got to be accurate. Yeah, of course. Although, you know, not if you're writing a storybook. But I would say actually it's more what appeals to you. You know, we're talking about you personally now, writing for impact, you conveying something about yourself, you writing a blog to put on your website, or writing a LinkedIn post. You know, if you're doing that, you should be thinking about your own tone of voice and how you want to come across, what it is you want to say. Okay, so good writing can be an awful lot of different things. It has to have these sorts of things of grammar and spelling and accuracy, but then beyond that, kind of anything goes really. There's all sorts of good writing. So, you know, it can be all of these different things. You know, if it's Catelyn Moran, it's probably funny. It's very conversational. It might be thought provoking, but it can be any of these things. It can be powerful. It can be simple. You know, your writing should be whatever it is that you want to say about yourself. You know, you might want to come across as just very professional and thought provoking and informational, or you might be the sort of person that wants to be very dramatic and very anecdotal and descriptive and humorous. So, you know, this is something that you can think about yourself and as part of thinking about your personal brand. Okay, so how do you do that? And I'm not going to talk a lot about a personal brand, because that's a whole other conversation, and that's not something that I'm really an expert on. But again, if we are talking about the sort of writing where you're writing an opinion piece, or you're writing for LinkedIn or something like that, you know, you probably do want to be thinking about, you know, who you are, you know, or who your company is, who you are, you know, if you're an individual operating as a consultancy, who that consultancy is, or if you're in a small company, who that company is. You know, within that, you'll be thinking about what your purpose is, what your goals are, personality, etc., etc. And the ones I've highlighted in blue there are the ones that are very specific to sort of finding your tone of voice. So you want to be thinking about your personality, you want to be thinking about your audience, clearly. And, you know, again, as part of, before you even start communicating as a business or as a business person, you're probably thinking about your audience and your personas and who you're talking to. And that comes very much into your tone of voice. So if your clients are all bankers, you probably want to have a slightly different tone of voice than if they're all children's TV presenters, for example. Although that would be an interesting job. So yeah, personas and style and tone of voice. Now, style and tone of voice are two different things. Style relates to things like, do you use the Oxford comma, which is, will I have a comma after the last and in a list of things, or will I not? That's just a personal choice. It's a style thing. Where will I use capitals? Where will I not use them? Those sorts of things. And I wouldn't spend a lot of time thinking about style, because there are some very good style guides that you can get for free online, like all the good publications, like the Guardian has a free style guide online. And if you just want to check things like, you know, what about you know, titles of people, do they have capitals, or do jobs have capitals? You know, I don't really know what's the done thing. You can look up style guides. The Economist has a limited one online, or you can even buy them as well if you do a lot of writing and you want to adhere to a particular style. If you're writing for clients, and if you're writing, you know, quite often if you've been given you know, you've produced some work for a client, and you've produced the deck, and they say, oh, can you write us a white paper that they want to then put out under their name? They may well have a style guide that they can give to you, and you need to adhere to that. And then tone of voice, again, you know, this is the sort of thing that I was talking about on the previous slide. Who are you? How do you put yourself across? What sort of tone are you talking in? Is it light-hearted? Is it academic? Is it authoritative? And you can start to hone your writing towards those sorts of things. Again, if you're writing for a client and you're writing a white paper or something like that, you probably they will probably have a tone of voice guide. to give you that you can work towards. Okay. So take a breath. Right, so we're going to move on from the reading bit to the actual writing bit, and this is where we get to what I have called the foolproof framework. And I'm not able to do builds in this presentation, which is a bit annoying, because I'd like to sort of have built this up rather than just hitting you with a big thing on the screen to take in all in one go. But what I'll do is I'll talk you through it bit by bit. So I'm going to use a straw man. Let's say we've got to write a 1,000-word article, and again, it's this sort of blank piece of paper writing that I'm talking about, where you don't have a set of data to report on, you don't have results, you've just got perhaps an idea. You know, you want to write a blog, you want to write an opinion piece, you want to write an article, something like that to promote yourself, to show thought leadership. To influence people, to change their minds, to inform people about something you're doing, any of those reasons you want to write something. So it can be very hard to just stare at a blank page with this idea in your head and wonder where the words are going to come from. So this is my foolproof framework, okay? And you start at the top here with a central theme, idea or goal, okay? So just as a straw man, something to work with, I tend to I get asked to write a lot about diversity at the moment. I get asked to write a lot about sustainability. So there's sort of two big ideas that there's all sorts of things that you can write about them. So let's take sustainability as the idea. And yeah, just the central theme is we're going to write about sustainability. Okay, so if you're writing a 1,000-word piece, 1,000-word article, I would suggest that there's probably only kind of 3 things that people are going to remember or take out from it. If you try and overload a 1,000-word article with more than that, it's going to be too busy, and people aren't really going to remember. I mean, you know, some of the time if they remember kind of one thing, then you're lucky. But as a way of structuring a piece, if you think of what are the 3 things, so I've got my idea, I want to write about sustainability. What are the 3 things that I want people to know when they finish reading this article? Okay, so perhaps number 1 is I want them to know that you know, sustainability is really, really important. We have to do sustainable things because it's really good for the planet. We have to do it. Okay, so that'll be takeout 1. Okay, and then perhaps takeout 2 is I want them to know that actually if you act more sustainably in your business, it's not just good for the planet, it's actually good for your business as well. And then perhaps takeout 3 would be something like, it's actually people think it's very difficult, but it's actually very easy to do. Okay, so you're starting to build up what your article is going to be like. So those are your 3 takeouts. Then we come to the next bit, okay? For each of those takeouts, sustainability is really important. If you come up with 3 supporting points or pieces of evidence that build up to that takeout. So takeout 1 was it's really important to be sustainable because the world needs it. So you might want to go and find some data, do some desk research and find some data on you know, what's happening to the planet, why, you know, what happens if we don't get to net zero by 2050, or any of those sorts of things like that. You might find a quote from David Attenborough, for example, that says, you know, we all have to do this, or the gorillas are all going to die, or whatever it is. So it doesn't have to actually be statistics. It can be any sorts of data, or it can even be, you know, something that you think that is a piece of evidence that supports that. Okay, so you fill in those boxes with just a bullet point of what your evidence is. And then you do the same thing with takeout 2, and you do the same thing with takeout 3. Okay, so very simple. This is where all the thinking happens, and this is where all your desk research happens. But all you're writing at the moment is just some bullet points. So each of those boxes has got a bullet point in it. Okay, and then the next thing we do, and again, I would normally build this slide, so it's a bit irritating that I couldn't today, but anyway, the next thing you do is you arrange your bullet points for narrative flow. Okay, so what I mean by this is if we go back, you've got 9 bullet points here. And it might be that when you read them out, if we don't do this by 2050, this will happen. David Attenborough says this, blah, 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 that they naturally fall into a story like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. But it might be that doesn't actually make sense. So what you can do, just put all your bullet points in a Word document and just move them around until you get what feels like a narrative structure with kind of a beginning, kind of a middle, and kind of an end. Okay, and so you've got your 9 points arranged like that. Okay, and then because they're just bullet points, it's quite easy to expand on them. So you've got them all set out. You just need to write 100 words on each to just expand on that bullet point. So you've got your data point that says, by 2050, if we haven't reached net zero, this will happen. So, you can expand a little bit on that. And it's quite easy to just write 100 words around a piece of evidence that you've got. You might have some other sort of supporting stats that go in with that. Okay. And the quanties amongst you will have realized that by now, once you've done that, you have 900 words. So boom, article almost entirely written. And then you need to do something else as well. Okay. And there's a picture of a necklace on here because I always remember a really good piece of presentation training that I was given once a long time ago that said that, each of your slides on your deck is like a bead on a necklace, and you start off with your introduction to it, and then at the end you just sort of loop it back together and you bring yourself right back to the beginning and address whatever it was you said in the introduction, and you sort of join the necklace up together. So you have to write an introduction and a conclusion. And this goes back to what I was saying about Caitlin Moran and her talking about Felicity Jones and the farting and the whatever. And again, as I say, if you look at the columnists, a lot of them use these sort of very simple structures where she'll start off with something very anecdotal, entertaining to draw you in. She'll then find a little hook. So that's the introduction. She'll find a little hook to then hang her argument on it. So she talked about, Felicity Jones, and then she said, and then I read an article by Felicity Jones, and she talked about women in the arts, and then she wrote all her 9 points, her 900 words on women in the arts. And then because she and Felicity Jones had said about this, going out for a fart break, let's just make it a thing. She brought the whole thing right back to the end, because she was talking about an idea for women-only galleries. And she was like, like me and Felicity Jones said, why don't we just make it a thing? So she just very neatly tied the necklace up, made it seem like there was a point to having Felicity Jones in at the beginning, even though the article was about women in the arts. And it just made for a really satisfying ending because it just tied it up really neatly. And I think endings are things that people have a lot of trouble with as well. And quite a lot of the time, you'll write something and you just kind of stop. And it's sort of not satisfying, and it's quite difficult to know, okay, well, is this done? And how do I round this off? And, you probably want some sort of call to action if it's a blog or whatever. But actually, even before that, you want people to feel like, I know that this is over, and I feel like I've read a whole and complete piece. And this sort of little trick of just tying it back up to the beginning will give you that sort of satisfying feeling. It will justify your interesting and anecdotal and engaging start, and it'll just really complete the piece. So, if you've got your sort of 50 to 100 word introduction, your 50 to 100 word conclusion, your 900-ish words beginning, middle and end in the narrative flow that you've arranged it in, boom, there you are, you've got a 1,000-ish word article. And it really does work. It's really simple. And the reason that, to my mind, that it does work is because you do all the thinking here, and then you do a bit more thinking here in terms of arranging it in narrative flow, but you haven't wasted any time writing anything yet. You're not sort of 500 words in thinking, I don't know where this is going. It's going wrong. I'm stuck with it. I'm really, you've done all of that thinking. And actually, the truth is that sometimes when you start to write, sometimes you think, actually, that would be better up there, or, I can't quite link that together. And, and you fiddle around with it a bit. But because you've done all that thinking and preparing beforehand, it really does make going from blank page to 1,000-word article a lot simpler. So, have we got any questions at this point, Jane, before I move on?
Sorry, just specific. No, Judith, not at the moment. I think everybody's really engrossed. It's really good. I've just put up a reminder to say that if there are any questions, please post. But it's intriguing and involving so far. So I'm sure there will be questions at the end. But at the moment, I think we're all concentrating. It's flowing. It's flowing really well. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Great. I'll carry on. Okay.
Excellent.
So,
thank you.
You may not want to write a 1,000-word article, so that's fine, and I get that. You know, not everybody wants to do that. But the great thing about this framework is that it's infinitely scalable, and it fits kind of really with any type of work that you want to do. So if you're writing a longer piece, you know, you might think that it's fair for somebody to want to take out 4 things or 5 things, and you know, it might be that you don't need you can put 5 pieces of supporting evidence for each one, in which case you probably might want to then split that down into some more paragraphs, or whatever. But again, that's something that we'll come to a bit in editing. But yeah, if you want to write a longer piece, if you want to write a shorter piece, it might be that you only want people to know 2 things, and in which case you probably don't need the detail of supporting evidence. You know, if you want to write a sort of very mini blog or a short LinkedIn piece or something, it might literally be you just want people to know 1 key thing. There's 2 or 3 pieces of evidence towards it. That's it. But again, the principle is that you're doing the thinking, you're doing the narrative structuring, you're doing all of that first, and you're not faced with sort of the tyranny of the blank page and the just starting writing and not knowing where it's going and getting lost. So you can do that with anything. And as I said, when I first suggested that I might do this training course here, one of the things that everyone said was, "Oh, please do us about how to write the ICG profile, because we really hate doing that. It's really awful." But one of the things that actually is lovely about the ICG profile is that it's extremely structured. It gives you a word limit and everywhere, and it's got its own form of my foolproof framework, really. So it gives you an overview of 40 words. It asks you to talk about your services in 200 words, and it asks you to talk about you in 200 words. So the way that, and you've got a little bit of mine in there, so you can have a look at mine in your leisure and decide whether you like it or not. But this is kind of how I approach doing it. So your overview is your elevator pitch. It's just 40 words. And then you've got services and you've got about you. So services, I sort of broke down to, okay, I want people to know what I do and how I do it, and then to give some evidence for that. And then about me, I want to talk about my background, and I want to talk about why I do what I do, and then I want to put a bit of personal stuff in there as well. And, really with 200 words, you've got your sort of 60, 70 words in each of those bits. And that's it, boom, you're done. And, anyone can write 60 words. It's actually sometimes harder to write 60 words than it is to write 160, but we'll come on to that as well. We'll talk about that in a minute as well. Okay. So that's the writing bit, really. That's the foolproof framework. And the third thing that I said was super important. And this is where writing really starts to get good. So we've done it now. We've got our page and it's got 1,000 words on it, and we don't know necessarily whether they're good words or not. But the next thing that we do is the bit that makes them good words, and that's when we edit. Okay. Now you might already be familiar with this. This is this is going back some years now, but I really don't think that there is a better set of rules for good writing. This really hasn't changed since George Orwell's days, and if it's good enough for George Orwell, who had a fair amount of success with writing, I think it's probably good enough for us, really. So these are George Orwell's rules, and we'll go through them and just sort of talk about what they mean a little bit. So never use a metaphor, simile, or other figure of speech which you are used to seeing in print. So don't be cliched, basically. That's all that he's saying there. And, you know, sometimes it's easy for us to sort of fall into the trap of using sort of slightly cliched words because we feel like, oh, this is, you know, this is the buzzword and this is what everyone's talking about at the moment, and it makes you feel like you're in, and it makes you feel like you're, you know, you're in with the zeitgeist. But it it can be excluding to people who aren't in the zeitgeist, and also they can sometimes be a bit imprecise. And also it can just make it very boring as well, you know, if you're using sort of tired old metaphors. Always better to come up with something a bit new and a bit different. The second rule, never use a long word where a short one will do. And, you know, we're all guilty of this. And I think people like to feel like they're using more formal language and more business-like language. So instead of saying buy, they would say purchased. But, you know, you would never say that to your friend in the pub if you were talking about, you know, going shopping. So it's a good idea to think about writing just as how you would talk to your friend, how you would just talk to somebody. And those sorts of unnecessary long words that have a better short word alternative. If there isn't a short one, if it's a specific term and it just happens to be a long word, absolutely fine, not a problem with that at all. But if you're you know, feel like you're trying to sound a bit clever, then that's probably something that you should get rid of. Next rule, if it is possible to cut a word out, always cut it out. And this is, you know, I mean, I've been doing this for many years, and I still, the first time I write, I still have a lot of unnecessary extraneous words in there. And if I'm writing, so I've been doing a lot of MRS awards entries recently, and they're very specific word limits. And you write your thing and you think, you know, and then it's always, even if you know, you're writing, I think it was 1,500 words for the main piece and then 200 words for the summary. If you've written 2,000 words and you think that every single one of them is essential, it's always possible to get them down to 1,500 words. You know, there's always words that you can cut out. You can always make a sentence more spare. You can always do it. And it always makes me think, actually, I should do that with everything I write, really, because I'm sure it would be better writing if I then imposed a sort of arbitrary word limit on something I've done to try and cut stuff out. And I think this is very much the opposite of sometimes what we do when we have a blank page, is we feel scared of it and we waffle to fill it out. Okay, and you're like, oh, I've got to write 1,000 words, and you know, you end up padding it and puffing it because you're not really sure what you're going to say. So the framework should have helped you with that. You won't be doing that anymore. But if you have got a bit of sort of puff and unnecessary stuff in there, you know, just be really brutal, okay, and cut stuff out. There's a phrase which I don't know if people will have come across this, but it's kill your darlings, and it's been attributed variously to a number of different people. What it means is that it normally is applied to creative writing, but I think it's just as pertinent in business writing as well. It means that if there's a sentence or a paragraph or a section or something that you every time you read it you think, I just love that bit. That's just my favorite bit that I've done. That's the bit that you need to cut out, because inevitably it will be the bit that you just love the way you've expressed yourself so much that you're kind of ignoring the fact that it doesn't really fit in there, or it's not really adding anything, or you know, or actually it's just where you've tried to be a bit clever and show people how much you know, and actually that's you know, unbearable to a reader. So kill your darlings is a really good motto to keep by your side. Never use the passive where you can use the active. The depths were recruited, the focus groups were conducted. You know, we are taught to write like this. It comes from school where you're writing up experiments and everything's passive, and we end up doing it. And I wouldn't say that you can't ever have the passive form, you know, because the alternative is we conducted focus groups, and then you end up saying we all the time. So you can use it judiciously where it is necessary, but in general, anything that uses a passive form, and the reason it's bad writing is that it takes you one step further away from the action. The groups were conducted, that's more distance than we conducted groups. That's sort of visceral and present. You're in that. Never use a foreign phrase, scientific word, or jargon word if you can think of an everyday English equivalent. Obviously, sort of goes without saying. If those words are necessary, if they're specific, if there isn't another word that would do, absolutely fine. But don't pepper your work with jargon, because it's, as I said before, it's excluding to people who don't understand the jargon. And you may think, well, they shouldn't be reading my thing anyway, but you don't really want to exclude anybody. And it's just boring. It's boring to read. Okay. But then my favourite one is the last rule, which is, all this is fine, but actually, if you're going to say anything terrible, if you're tying yourself in knots to use the active instead of the passive, then actually don't bother. Just break the rule. It's absolutely fine. And my favourite quote on that is from Winston Churchill, and Winston Churchill is a source of many very great quotes. And this is about not ending a sentence with a preposition. So you would say, well, I don't want to put this is something that I can't put up with, or you can't end it with. So this is the type of errant pedantry up with which I will not put. So he's making the point exactly. It's barbarous to say that, so you would break this rule. So it sort of doesn't matter. If it's readable and easy to read and all those sorts of things, and enjoyable, it doesn't matter if you break one of those rules every now and again. So how are we doing for time? Okay. So this, I think, is probably the most important stage. I don't know, actually. I think reading is probably the most important stage, and then actually writing a lot. They're all important stages. But to turn your writing, so if you've used the framework and you've got your 1,000 words out, that's brilliant, and that's your first step. But this is the bit, the editing is the bit where it becomes polished and good and readable and better. Okay. But it's very hard to do it yourself. The way our brains work, if you write something yourself and then you read it yourself, you probably won't see the mistakes that you've made. It's quite hard to do it. So what I would counsel you to do is build in enough time for your writing that you can go away from it overnight. Because when you read it afresh the next day, all of a sudden, all those sort of glaring, awful things just jump out at you in a way that they didn't when you read it straight away the minute you finished it. Clearly, I don't always take my own advice about this. It's hard to do. It's hard to make that time, but it really, if you can do it, it really helps. The other thing is ask other people to read it. And writing is very vulnerable. It's especially if it's an opinion piece or a LinkedIn post or a personal profile. You're making yourself very vulnerable. But if you think about it, you're about to put these up for the whole world to read. So actually, if you're asking a trusted friend or trusted colleague or contact to read it, much better that you get the honest feedback at that stage than when you've posted it on LinkedIn and or tweeted something and been cancelled or whatever it is that's going to happen to you. It is vulnerable, and actually I would contend that the best writing is vulnerable. You put something, especially if it's this sort of opinion piece writing, that you do put something of yourself into it. It's different if you're writing a report and you're writing for a client and you've got their tone of voice guide and you're writing up data. You don't be putting your anecdotes into that. But for this sort of writing, it is vulnerable, but you have to make yourself a little bit vulnerable about it before you're vulnerable in public. Despite everything I've just said about all the rules, I would genuinely say do not stress too much about grammar and punctuation. Yes, it's table stakes. Yes, you have to get it basically right. But there are lots of resources out there. Grammarly works. Grammar Girls are a good website. Just educate yourself, and you can improve. But the secret is no one else knows this stuff either. Most people do not know if your comma is in the wrong place. They do not know. And actually, I mean, commas are out of anything, I'd say read up on commas, because there's so many rules about commas. But actually, you can apply them in different, there's judgment around that as well. So I would not let it ever stop you writing. If you feel like, oh, I don't really know, I don't know anything about grammar, I can't remember it, I did it at school, it's awful. Don't ever let that stop you, because number one, you can educate yourself. Number two, other people look at it. But number three, the real secret is nobody else knows, and nobody will really care. And if they care that you've used a colon instead of a semicolon, then they're pedants, and you don't care about them anyway. And the final thing is you can always ask someone else to edit it. If you're working on a big piece, that it's just too painful for you to edit it yourself, perhaps pay someone to edit it, and then that it's their fault. And the final thing that I would say, again, and this goes back to the framework of just getting some words down there, is that you can always edit a bad page. This is no difficult. You can't edit a blank page. So just start writing. Just get your stuff out there, and then you can always hone it and make it better. So on that, some final words. Writing of this type, of this sort of personal, the profile, the LinkedIn profile, the blogs, the opinion pieces, it is really scary. We fear being judged, we fear getting it wrong, and it does require you to be vulnerable. And as I said, I think the best writing has that sort of vulnerability and that humanity, and that anecdotes from personal life, that personality, that brand personality for you that we talked about. And I just think the best way to overcome that fear, like the columnists, is to start and to do it regularly and to use these tips. And that's me.
Thank you, Judith, very much indeed. That was inspiring, I think, in terms of all that. There's some very useful tips and hits. I haven't got any questions on my chat, which either says that you've solved it for everybody, so we're all brave and going to bounce on, or actually you've bamboozled everything and I think. But I just have a few moments, and just please do switch on your cameras and put your hands up if you would like to ask Judith anything. I do have one, which is just struck me, and I think you may have answered it in the last bit. But your framework is very a good guide in terms of getting started and getting structured with those headings and the bullet points underneath. But is there merit in actually just I don't know, doing what sometimes we used to call a brain dump, just writing a stream of consciousness, and then taking that, I mean, at least filling a page so you've got something down there? Or is that sort of the road to madness, really?
Well, I think it depends on what you're trying to achieve, really. I mean, I think stream of consciousness writing is good for creativity, because I think when you're doing that, you don't necessarily quite know what's going to come out, and you can get all sorts of ideas and stuff popping out of that. So I would even say that perhaps if you're looking for ideas, and if you're looking for what you think you want to write about, perhaps do some stream of consciousness writing beforehand, and then but then take the ideas that come out of that and start to organize them. So that would be my suggestion.
So a kind of springboard to finding finding your themes.
Yeah, perhaps. I mean, I think for stream of consciousness writing to then turn itself into a well-structured, readable piece, I think you're going to then have to take that step back and do that sort of thinking exercise anyway, because stream of consciousness is by its very definition kind of unstructured and just whatever's coming to mind. And as I say, as a creativity thing, I think it's a great thing to do, absolutely. But I'm not sure it's necessarily the best starting point for a very sharp and structured article.
Yeah. I was just thinking about the sort of the leap, the bridge from what's in your head and all these wonderful wonderful ideas to getting it on the page. Yeah.
And again, that's why I sort of think about the framework. So if you do the stream of consciousness and you're getting some ideas and some you know, and perhaps, you know, helping you to form your opinion. And you know, that can very much come out of stream of consciousness, you know, and particularly in creative writing as well. I mean, do a bit of creative writing as well, and you really don't know what's going to come out necessarily. You know, if you're writing about characters, they really do their own thing. And you know, if for example, let's take the sustainability subject again, if you just sat down and thought, right, I'm going to write about sustainability, and you just did a stream of consciousness, right, I imagine you'd get all sorts of your feelings and your opinions and your emotions and all that sort of stuff out of it, and that might give you your 3 takeaways that you want people to think about, or it might give you your overarching theme. And then you can then start to do the organizing process as well. So it could be like a pre-step, like a piece of exploratory research before you then get into your thinking.
Yeah. Excellent. There are some questions coming in. There's some nice accolades. People saying thank you very much. They found it really useful. They've had to actually depart, but thank you. So it's gone down well, Judith. Thank you.
Okay,
a nice, interesting question from Liz. Have you used something like Miro to produce your structure? And she's putting in brackets, especially if collaborating with a co-author. So I suspect there's an underlying point there as well.
I don't actually know what Miro is.
Okay. So I think that's, I don't know whether you want to come in, Liz, and explain, or whether there's hints and tips for when you're actually writing with a co-author. Have you ever experienced that?
Sorry, I just put
Liz.
my. I couldn't. Yeah, it's me. Don't get away from me.
Hey.
So, no, Miro is a collaborative whiteboard. There's another one that I've used, and I actually have been using. And I just wondered if you thought it. So a little bit like the freeform, but you could sort of create your structure that you've put together. Sorry, I joined a little late because I was fighting the technology this morning, and it mostly won. But you could sort of put your structure into something like Miro and then move things around more easily, and you can export it as well. But I just have you experimented with any sort of tools?
I haven't, but I could see how that would work really, really well, especially if you're collaborating, because you know you can get. I mean, the other type of writing, which is that you've got a load of data and a load of results. It's kind of almost like an inverse process to this, where you know I would counsel in that case you just brain dump everything that you think you know, and then you can start to organize it and categorize it and that sort of thing. And I can see that being a very effective process for especially collaborative writing. I mean, collaborative writing is very, very difficult, and I have had to do it on a number of occasions, and quite often you know, what's best is that if then one person ends up doing the final edit, because you get you can get a consistent tone of voice all the way through doing like that. But to get the structure out and to get all the ideas out and to get from that, you know, from what you know into that sort of framework and everything, I can see a tool like that being extremely effective. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
People saying they found this really useful, Judith. So thank you, particularly the structure. And people being encouraged to just saying, you know, the idea to just give it a go, and not fearing getting it wrong, which of course we all do, and that holds us back. But it's question, I think there is dive in and have a go, and there are some interesting tools to do that. I don't know whether anybody else wants to come in and ask a question. Be brave, turn your camera on and dive in. If not, I have one more, which is going back to the dreaded ICT profile kind of pie. Is in terms of if you're structuring something like that, where you're obviously presenting it's part of your brand image, brand personality. Does that style of writing have to be predetermined? Because I'm guessing that if you're doing more of a columnist kind of thing, you can evolve your style and your personality as you go. But just in terms of really structuring it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think it's necessarily an evolving thing, really. I think, you know, it's all very well to say, oh, decide your tone of voice. Right, my tone of voice is going to be, you know, I'm going to be humorous and conversational and whatever. But then actually doing it is something that evolves. You know, what actually is conversational writing? You know, you can think about it, but it's only really in the practicing of it. You know, and I think it happens both ways. So you'll think about how you want to write. You'll write something, and then you'll think about, well, how was that I wrote? And you know, and you just will hone and continue. And you know, and as your business changes, and as the sort of things you do change as well, you know, as freelancers and consultants, we all end up being, you know, we think we're setting out to do one thing, and then an opportunity comes along, and we end up doing something else. And it might be that that you want to change. I mean, I would contend that for this, when we're talking about writing from a personal perspective, and I mean, it used to be very much that you'd have a very separate business persona and a human persona, but that's, you know, that's absolutely not where we're at now. So I would contend that as a human being, your tone of voice should really be consistent, whatever your audience. And you know, you probably want that. So when I do sometimes do some sort of content planning and tone of voice training and stuff like that with businesses, and even if they've got different audiences, I would still counsel them to have a consistent tone of voice, because it's who they are as a brand. And you know, if you change the type of writing that you do. You know, if it's a brand that's got consumer and business customers, for example, you're still the same brand. You still have the same brand values, but you just tweak the sorts of things that you're saying to those audiences. But your tone of voice is very much about your personality, and that doesn't change.
Great. I think we've probably got time for one more, and I can see Dan's clicked on. Dan, do you want to have a say?
Thank you. A quick question, hopefully a good last question. Thank you for that really interesting talk, fascinating and really inspiring. Who is your favourite business writer and why? So if we could all go away and read one person, who should we be reading?
Oh my gosh, that's a horrible question.
It's a good one though.
Look to the bookshelf again.
You know what? I quite like. I'm reading Upstream by Chip and Dan Heath at the moment, which is really fun. And really, like, I like their stuff because it's really easy to read, and again, it's very much this sort of, you know, the anecdotes and the real life examples and all of that sort of stuff. And it's about systems thinking, which is something that I really I do a lot, and I really think is really, really important. So that's my current fave. But yeah, I think anything that's sort of accessible and, you know, not too slick, because I think some of them can be a little bit slick and a bit, you know, you don't want to look too much under the hood because there's not that much there. But I like that one. I think it's both Chip and Dan Heath. It might only be one of them. Can't remember. Anyway, but it's called Upstream. So there you go. One recommendation to me.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so we're coming to the end of our, and I know, Judith, you need to whiz off because you fit us in on an early session. So many thanks for that. You are in the ICG. So there's no real getting away from us. So I'm gathering that you're happy for people to get in touch with you individually if they want to.
Yeah,
and there will be a recording of this session up on the website shortly. When Lucy's done her stuff. So just reminds for me to say lots of nice thank yous on the chat, saying so very well done, and thank you so much, and have a good day, everyone.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks to everyone for coming along. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.